What if being a teacher meant something more than just, well, teaching? Today, we're going to unpack a really powerful idea that kind of redefines the whole job, the teacher as a cultured professional. Let's dive right in. Okay, so this is where it all comes from, straight out of the Quebec curriculum. Now I know, it sounds a little academic, maybe a bit dense, but stick with me because this is the key to a whole new way of looking at teaching. It tells us that a teacher really has to wear three different hats: the interpreter, the facilitator, and the critic. But that's the real question, isn't it? I mean, that all sounds great on paper, but what does it actually look like when the bell rings and you're in the classroom? Well, that's exactly what we're going to break down. We're going to turn this big idea into three practical roles you can actually use. All right, let's start with the first hat. You could argue this one is the foundation for everything else that follows: the teacher as the interpreter. This is all about making learning genuinely meaningful. So what do we mean by interpreter? No, we're not talking about translating languages. We're talking about translating meaning. The teacher's job here is to be a bridge builder, creating a strong connection between the stuff in the curriculum and the actual world the student lives in. But here's the thing. You can't build a sturdy bridge out of thin air, right? You need a rock-solid foundation. And that means an effective interpreter knows their subject inside and out: the theories, the methods, the whole shebang. And crucially, they know the curriculum so well they can spot exactly what students need to grasp to move forward. And this just lays out the process perfectly. See, an interpreter never lets a subject exist in a vacuum. Think about it. A history lesson about the Industrial Revolution is okay, but what if you connect it to a science class talking about steam engines, and then to an English class reading Dickens? And then, here's the magic, you link it all to a conversation about AI and how it's changing jobs right now. That's the connection that really matters, relating it all to the world students see every day. Okay, so let's move on to our second hat, which builds directly on the first. After you've interpreted all this knowledge and made it meaningful, you become a facilitator. This is all about shaping the classroom environment itself. As a facilitator, your goal is to create more than just a room where facts are delivered. It's about turning those four walls into a dynamic, exciting, and inclusive cultural space where every single student feels like they belong and their voice matters. And this chart gets right to the heart of it. On one side, you have the students' own culture, their music, their video games, their family traditions. And on the other, you have the school's culture, the official curriculum, academic knowledge, all that stuff. The facilitator's job is to spark a real conversation between these two worlds. So how do you actually do that? Well, it's about creating opportunities for students to bring their world into the discussion. A great facilitator gets them talking about what they're passionate about, explaining why they like what they like, and most importantly, engaging in respectful conversations where different ideas can come together. And that brings us to our third and final hat. And this one is probably the most advanced. After you've interpreted knowledge and facilitated a dialogue, you also have to be a critic. Now, when we say critic, don't think of someone who was just being negative or tearing things down. Think of it more like being an analyst. The teacher as critic is all about building those higher-order thinking skills. It's about teaching students how to think, not just what to think. And just look at the scope of this. This critical thinking isn't just for analyzing a poem. A teacher wearing the critic hat encourages students to question, well, pretty much everything: the social media they scroll through, what's happening in their own community, big scientific debates, and art from any time period. The goal is to help shape them into thoughtful, engaged citizens. So we've talked a lot about the student and the classroom, but this brings up a really, really important question. If the teacher is supposed to be an interpreter, a facilitator, and a critic of culture, what about their own culture? Because this is where this whole competency really expands beyond the classroom walls. To be a true cultured professional, the work can't just be about the students. A huge part of it has to be internal too. This means a teacher has to turn that same critical lens back on themselves. They need to take an honest look at their own background, recognize its strengths, but also its blind spots, and then actively look for ways to enrich their own understanding and make their teaching more inclusive. And finally, none of this happens in a bubble. A huge piece of this puzzle is acting as a collaborator. This means reaching outside the school, working with people in the community, partnering with local artists or museums, and using every resource you can find to bring the real world into your classroom. So after we've put on all three hats, the interpreter, the facilitator, and the critic, we're left with this one last powerful thought. This whole idea isn't just about teaching a subject. It's about actively building the culture of the future, one classroom at a time. And yeah, that's a massive responsibility, but it's also an incredible opportunity.